Obviously, the president reacting to changes at the Pentagon. Donald Rumsfeld on the way out. Robert Gates tapped to come in. Two former Pentagon insiders join us now to talk about what's ahead. Lawrence Korb is a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, and Frank Gaffney is the president of the Center for Security Policy. They both served in the Defense Department. Both were Assistant Secretaries of Defense. Welcome to both of you.
Nice to be with you.
Larry, were you surprised at the announcement?
I was surprised at the timing because the president last week told us he wasn't going to do it. I think it was the right thing to do, but I think it sort of sends the wrong signal to the troops when a week ago he said he's going to stay, and then 2 days later you announce you have a successor and you've already been talking to the person to take the job.
Frank, do you think this was a bad move on the part of the administration?
I do in this sense. I think that it was inevitable politically, but I think the substance is very troubling because I believe what is being signaled here in the person of Bob Gates is a eminently qualified man, but whose judgment is very different from that of I think not only Don Rumsfeld, but the president to this point, on the key question of our time, which is, will we be negotiating with enemies like the regime in Iran in the hopes that they'll somehow help us solve the problem they're creating, in no small measure, in Iraq? And I think that's going to be a mistake, potentially very strategic and long-standing dimensions.
But 2 years left in this administration, a new Secretary of Defense, given what we know already, let's say on the ground in Iraq, is this man really going to make that much of a difference, Larry?
I think it's going to make a big difference because remember that when he was working for the first President Bush, he was opposed to going into Baghdad, predicting exactly what would happen. Number two, he's a member of the Baker-Hamilton Iraq Study Group, which is going to recommend some changes in the policy. And I think, number three, since he turned down the job of the Director of National Intelligence a year ago, I have no doubt that he got assurances from President Bush before he took the job that we could make the necessary changes and the changes that are needed in Iraq.
And what do you think that's going to be?
Well, I think what you're going to see, the Baker-Hamilton group is going to recommend what we call a phased withdrawal, that you'll begin to take some of the troops out. You'll change the mission from actively going out after the insurgents to supporting the Iraqi troops and training the Iraqi troops. And that by the end of the President Bush administration, you'll be somewhere between 35 and 50,000 troops, which will be enough to prevent the situation from degenerating into chaos, but will relieve the stress on our armed forces, as well as give us military options to deal with the situations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and North Korea.
Of course, that scenario could change depending on the level of violence and the status of the insurgency. So, Frank, do you agree that Robert Gates is going to make a significant, tangible difference in a place like Iraq?
Well, I hope Larry's right and that it'll all work out along the lines that he's just described and make a desirable change. I think the change is in the offing. I definitely believe that's what Bob Gates has in mind. I think Larry's right about the Baker agenda here being what he will be pushing forward. I'm afraid that you can get change and yet the change can be for the worse. I don't, for example, think that 30 to 50,000 troops are going to be able to manage and keep the place going from where it is now into chaos if 130,000 troops, we're being told, aren't able to do that.
But what if there was a partitioning, though, of the country?
Well, look, there are different scenarios here for effecting our surrender from Iraq and our withdrawal and retreat from it. One of them is partition, one of them is turning it over to the Syrians and the Iranians, another is sort of just throwing up our hands and strategically redeploying, as Larry and others have suggested. I'm afraid all of those are going to leave Iraq a very serious mess, a festering sore, and create a strategic problem for us, not only in the region, but as our enemies are emboldened and being made more aggressive, problems for us here at home as well.
All right, but you use the word, I mean, it's not missed that you use the word surrender. All right, you take a guy like Robert Gates. This is how he is being described by several analysts, that he is pragmatic, realistic, but no lightning rod. This is not a man who wants to shake things up. Most have said he is the antithesis of a Donald Rumsfeld. So you are predicting almost like an apocalyptic scenario, where a Vietnam scenario where the United States would have to unilaterally withdraw in defeat. You really think it's going to go that far?
Well, look, I think there's going to be political cover. I think that's what the Baker-Hamilton study group is about, is providing political cover. You get the guys who are doing as much to disrupt things in Iraq as anybody, the Iranians and the Syrians, and you're going to make them partners in solving the problem in Iraq as part of our phased withdrawal. I suggest to you that we may call it something else, but I think that will be tantamount to surrender and ultimately have the results of surrender, which is, again, an emboldened enemy and more danger for us here at home as well.
Larry, is Robert Gates the man who buckles to the word surrender? Do you see it that way?
Well, no, I don't see it that way. I think basically unless we start a phased withdrawal, the Iraqis will never make the political compromises necessary to create an Iraq that's worth fighting and dying for. And until you do that, it doesn't matter how long we stay. And the big lever we have is the troops, because right now they're not doing what they need to do. Look, since they had their election, we have lost 10 battalions worth of soldiers and Marines killed or wounded, while they have not done a darn thing that they promised in terms of modifying the Constitution, disbanding the militias. Until they do that, our military commanders will tell you nothing will change. And that's what we need to do. That's the lever we need to push to get them to do that.
And nobody feels it more than the families, the military families making that sacrifice. Lawrence Korb, thank you very much. Frank Gaffney, pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.